Hello and welcome to Cinelit. My name is Adam Marsh. Before we kick off our wide-ranging discussion around the work of Italian maestro of horror Dario Argento, I feel I need to explain a few things. Those of you familiar with Dario's work will probably know he established his name making giallo movies and is probably the director most responsible for defining the key characteristics of this particular subgenre of film. Now myself, Daryl and our special guest, in our haste and quite frankly giddy excitement, glossed over the fact that many of you out there may not be familiar with this relatively obscure subgenre. So, for the uninitiated, a giallo is a particular brand of murder mystery fiction. The name giallo, Italian for yellow, derives its name from the long-running series of crime mystery novels by Italian publishing giant Mondadori. Notable for their distinctive yellow covers, the book series published novels by leading crime authors like Agatha Christie, Ellery Queen, Edgar Wallace, Ed McBain, Raymond Chandler and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The term giallo then transfers to film, where filmmakers in the 1960s started making adaptations and new movies inspired by these mystery fictions. The film genre developed its own set of characteristics that include, but are not exclusive to, black glove killers, complicated murder mystery plots, themes of sex, violence, madness and paranoia, as well as the wonderfully lurid titles like Five Dolls for an August Moon, or Death Walks on High Heels, or A Lizard in a Woman's Skin. So, there's a little primer for the uninitiated. And for those of you that already knew all that, well, at least you got to hear my sultry voice for a couple of extra minutes. Now, over to our regular scheduled broadcast. Hello, welcome to Cinelit. My name is Adam Marsh, and I am joined as ever by my Cinelit's resident expert, Mr. Daryl Buxton. How are you, Daryl?
I'm fine, thanks, Adam.
Great stuff. We're nearing Halloween, so we figure we need to move into the horror genre slightly. So we are going to be looking at the work of one of the maestros of horror, Mr. Dario Argento, and to help us with that task, we have our very special guest, Mr. John Martin here. John is known for co-creating the fanzine Samhain, and also the wonderfully titled Giallo Pages. Excellent fanzine covering a lot of Italian horror, particularly the Giallo movies. Welcome, John.
And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with yourself and Daryl.
Great stuff. So we're going to be talking Dario Argento, a filmmaker well regarded in the horror circles. And beyond, courtesy of, I guess, a lot of the time been brought to recent attention with the remake of Suspiria with Tilda Swinton and Dakota Johnson fairly recently. That brought his name and his kudos to the fore. Did you guys see that?
Yes, I did.
There was a nice long pause there.
I'd actually got high hopes for the Suspiria remake, which was from Luca Guadagnino, and he's made some excellent films in the past. Call Me By Your Name is one that listeners may well have seen here at Quad. Brilliant film from a couple of years ago. And so I thought, yeah, he's sort of ideally placed to make Suspiria because he'll take it seriously. It won't be a sort of horror knockoff. He won't get it wrong. He'll bring a bit of art and intention to it. And in the end, for me, it played rather more like a remake of the recent Hereditary than it did a remake of Suspiria. And it just went on too long. It added elements that didn't need to be there. It took elements away that did need to be there. We're going to talk about Dario's film Mother of Tears as we go. And I rewatched Mother of Tears in preparation for today this week. And I think Luca has actually studied that film more than he studied Suspiria in making his remake. John, your thoughts on it?
Well, I have to confess to having been really snotty about this. I haven't seen it.
Wow.
And perhaps at some point I will. But I had my suspicions. The whole thing seemed vaguely pointless. I looked at the length. How long is it? 3.5 bloody hours or something?
Yes, I think it's 155 minutes or something. Yes, so it's well over 2.5 hours. Yeah.
And then people whose opinions I respect, such as Daryl, were feeding back to me that it wasn't really worth my while. And I'm afraid I acted upon that, or didn't act. I haven't seen it yet.
It's one of those interesting things where people often say, it's like, why are people remaking all these rubbish movies from the past? It's like, you should remake decent movies, and then everyone kicks off when you remake a decent movie as well. With remakes, you can't win. You're either remaking from a bad source, or if you remake from a good source, people say, well, what's the point in remaking that?
You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
Yeah.
So,
anyway, I think we should get on to talking about the real deal. And what we ought to do, first of all, is just go through a very quick sort of précis of who Dario is and where he came from in the 60s. And as we've got John here, he can sort of fill in the gaps and correct anything we miss out, I'm sure. But Dario started out as a journalist, I believe, for the publication Paese Sera in the 60s, and he was writing film reviews and so on, and then became one of these film critics or people involved on the fringes of the film business, a bit like me and Adam, really, you know. Who
Speak
then,
for yourself, mate.
who then get into making movies. You know, we've done sort of one each, and Dario's made a 50-year career out of it, so we can't really compare ourselves with him.
I nearly made a Dario Argento documentary, which turned into one of those lost projects, but maybe we'll talk about that later.
There's a lot of those about, yeah. But Dario was a film journalist then, and his review work, whether it was a case of I can write stuff better than the stuff I'm watching, you know, which is what most critics seem to think.
How well known was he as a critic? Was it? I mean, because obviously you get the famous example of critics crossing over into cinema is the French New Wave and the Cahiers de Cinema group of Truffaut and Godard. They were well-respected film critics writing well-respected articles, and then went, well, okay, we'll prove it. And they went over and made films and went, see, that's how you make films. Was Dario in that ilk, or was he just eking along in the industry trying to work? And was he a well-respected film critic? Was he that kind of level, or was it just a case of like, I always wanted to make movies and this was just a way of making money?
I think even beyond being a film critic, he was perceived as being a sort of countercultural critic. He interviewed musicians, rock stars, allegedly, and there's a lot of apocryphal stuff in Dario's resume, but allegedly he interviewed the Beatles. I'd personally be very interested to see that stuff anthologized and translated at some point. I mean, Harvey Fenton's published some great books about him, including his own autobiography. In the autobiography, Argento mentions the Beatles interviews and so on. I'd like to see that stuff. He was perceived as well as being sort of that time, the spirit of 68, that kind of revolution is in the air, you know.
Okay.
And he's kind of parlayed this into, you know, Dario Argento himself is a cult figure, isn't he? He's sort of this sepulchral-looking, you know, eminence of horror. He has a shop. He's a brand. He's turned himself into a brand. He's got the Profondo Rossa shop in Rome. He's got comic books featuring his own exploits, which he's an EC sort of horror host. So, yeah, that's probably taken us a long way away from what you were asking me, actually. But,
I mean, all that, obviously the comparisons to Hitchcock early on in his career don't go away with everything that Dario seems to do. He seems to continue to go down that route of like, yeah, well, Hitchcock did it, it's good enough for him.
Yeah, everybody has to be the Italian somebody in Italy. There was a point where his daughter, Aja, was called the Italian Winona Ryder. And just personally, I kind of think that's selling the real Winona Ryder a bit short. But, the Hitchcock thing with Argento is, it was useful on marquees and in ads and things. I think another director with which he has a lot in common, and they both recently turned 80, Brian De Palma. He's much more a hardcore student and developer of Hitchcock stuff. I think with Argento, it's kind of an interesting marketing tag for a while.
Yeah, I can't see Hitchcock making Suspiria or Inferno or anything like that.
Although, you know, by the time Hitchcock made Frenzy, Dario had got his first 3 films out, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And you could almost say that Frenzy is the work of the English Argento.
Yes, very good.
So moving on to those early things, obviously he got his toe in the water. He co-wrote the screenplay for Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West.
Yes, he did.
And then
including apparently one of the most famous scenes in that movie. It's often stated.
The opening sequence.
That's supposed to be Dario's work. So,
wow.
Then got into the director's chair, and I think we'll let you kick off with this, Adam, because you're probably the biggest fan of his first movie.
Bird of Crystal Plumage, a big fan of, yes. More of a Profondo Rosso fan myself. That's my favourite Argento one. But those early Giallo movies I find infinitely fascinating and infinitely rewatchable. Great movie. I don't know what it is about those movies, but I think it's the way that they're shot. And particularly, and that's one of the comparisons I was looking at, his later Giallos. When you look at that, it feels like they're much smaller. And those early Giallos are all, I don't know how wide they're shot, but they're widescreen.
Yeah, they look like big movies.
Yeah.
They're intended to be seen in cinemas, and because, there wasn't really any other way of seeing film at that time, as we know. For newcomers to Argento, you'll, if you sort of dig into his career and read some of the books that John's mentioned there from Fab Press on Argento's career, you'll often see these first three movies referred to as the Animal Trilogy, because they've all got names of creatures in the title. So
which in itself spawned a whole cottage industry.
Yeah, everyone named it. Yeah,
with crazy names.
Yeah, except no substitute though. We've got Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Four Flies on Grey Velvet, Cat of Nine Tails. So I think the three films have got sort of similarities with each other, but they're also all very different from each other in ways. So let's talk a little bit about those three as a piece.
I think it's interesting that, as Adam said, they are so cinematic, and yet Argento did not go to Centro Sperimentale di Cinematografia. Excuse me. He did, come up as a critic, so he was absorbing all this stuff, and he managed to convey that to the screen in his own early movies. His father was a producer, and his father, he produced a few movies. Mainly the family is very well connected in the industry. And when he was making Bird of the Crystal Plumage, the Titanus head, Goffredo Lombardo, was looking at the film and saying, "This isn't a Giallo, what the hell is this?" And they were trying to get him kicked off the movie and replace him with Terence Young, I think. But nowadays, which is so funny, because as you say, Adam, this is, we think, the quintessence of Giallo, these films now, but at the time it was perceived as being such a dramatic change and such a transformation of the genre.
I think it shifted that form, definitely, because the Giallo was in its early stages anyway, almost in a sort of pupa-like stage, And I don't think it was necessarily connected with the horror film as much as it became. And I think it's Dario who... He wasn't the first person to make a sort of crime thriller horror movie type crossover as he did with these three movies. There had been other examples prior to that in Italy and in Germany, of course, with the Creamy, which sort of rose up at the same time as the early Giallo.
The Edgar Wallace films.
Yeah. So I think Dario's big contribution to that was to really sort of marry the horror film with the exotic experimental crime thriller and set the course of Italian commercial cinema off on a whole new path.
I think that Mario Bava invented the Giallo. It's generally conceded with the Evil Eye, a.k.a. The Girl Who Knew Too Much in 1963, I think. And every time Bava made a Giallo, he kind of fiddled with the form and came up with something new. But there was a tendency in the late 60s, the Giallo was turning into, I term them bonk-busting Gialli, because they are about beautiful, rich people having affairs with each other and cheating each other out of money, killing each other off for insurance money and all the rest of it.
Usually starring Carol Baker.
Yes, Carol Baker. and generally directed by Umberto Lenzi. That was the way it was going. But Argento, with the Bird of the Crystal Plumage, people conning each other out of money and jet setters being sexy and so on, that was out. And black-gloved, leather-clad crazy sex killers were in. That was what happened.
And I think the fact that Dario made these three films bang, bang, bang within a couple of years of each other, and that they got fairly wide global distribution. They played all over Europe, they played here in the UK in cinemas, they got released in America. They sort of shared a lot of that similar imagery with the Black Glove Killer and the knives and things, the sort of twists at various points through the plot, the weird characters. It was almost as though he'd sort of taken the Giallo and remoulded it in his own image, sort of thing, and, to coin a phrase, made a career out of it.
It also, for me, it also felt like he was playing to an international audience as well. It wasn't just to go, this is made for the Italian market, we can make a fortune. It felt like it's not just a case of, well, we'll dub it and then we can send it to America, no problem. It felt like, well, how could I position this movie and shoot this movie and show off Rome in almost like a tourist kind of way. It was like, we're not just going to show you beautiful women, handsome guys, black glove killers, all kinds of. We're going to show you the beauty of Rome as well, and it's almost like a tourist kind of thing. You're getting like tourism via black glove killers.
When I write about this stuff, I often say that Bird of the Crystal Plumage became a surprise international crossover smash hit. I mean, do you think Argento was surprised, or because you're saying there you think he was really going for it?
Well, I don't know whether it was consciously or whether it was just
interesting
culturally.
To ponder that,
whether him interviewing lots of different people from around the world, working on the westerns, which are all about the visual. Maybe he just thought, the way his brain was thinking about constructing movies,
and of course, he'd seen the way Leone had crossed over.
Adam, in terms of what you were saying about the way these films were sold, and you were talking about the way in which he sort of wanted to sort of showcase the Italian locations and send those out to cinema audiences all over the world, I think also in terms of getting that international flavour, his casting is quite interesting, because in the films he casts non-Italian actors in significant parts, and they're reasonably sort of starry names. They're people you've heard of, but they're not Gregory Peck or anyone at that level, And, of course, there was a tendency in the Italian industry to sort of anglicise their own credits. They're famous for this. So even someone like Mario Bava was billed under English-style names to try and pretend that the Italian product was actually coming out of the UK or out of the States. Whether that actually fooled audiences, I doubt it very much. But when you've got the sort of people in the casts that Dario uses in those early films, that's almost a shorthand to sell the films and be able to get them released in these other territories. So they may not necessarily be recognisable star names, but the audiences would be able to tell that, they are English or American actors, and they're speaking in their own voices, and they're speaking English on set. When we see their mouths move, well, they were dubbed, of course, because that was a sort of given in the Italian industry, but at least the lip sync was very, very good because they were talking in their own language, and so that in itself would help to sell the films to a non-Italian audience, to an English-speaking audience.
Yeah.
I can never tell whether Susie Kendall's character in Bird is supposed to be American or Italian or English. I just,
She lives on an island in the middle of the Atlantic.
Very glamorous one. Yeah.
But that's typical, that's what gives these films their flavour, and they become international films because of that. And
but there was a trend for moving to different European cities for all these giallo movies, wasn't there?
And a lot of them were co-productions.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And again, crossover with the creamy as well, the German and Danish movies, so you'd often get films set in Copenhagen or in German locations. It's interesting how these two forms sort of rose together, and I think me and Adam are working on the podcasts through a sort of series of crime movie episodes. The regular listeners will have already heard a couple of these, and we're intending to do more on the giallo and on the creamy at a future date.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I could spend all day talking about giallo, it's fine.
But so we won't go into intense detail about that today, but we're going to do a sort of rough chronology of his career today. But he's one of those filmmakers where that's sort of impossible, because his career does sort of jump, and he sort of refers back to his early work with some later films. So if I throw in a couple of his later titles, how do you guys think that films like Tenebrae from 1982 and Non Ho Sono's Sleepless from 2001 connect with the Animal Trilogy, this early work?
Well, I think the intermediate film between those is Deep Red, isn't it? Profondo Rosso.
Yes, yeah.
And our listeners can't hear this, but Adam's sitting here, and his COVID mask today has got the poster image from Profondo Rosso on it. So we really live this stuff, for you listeners. In fact, there was even a tactical retreat. You've talked about some of the chopping and changing in his career. After the Animal Trilogy, he made 5 Days in Milan,
which is a historical drama,
epic,
yes,
And then maybe he was trying to, shift career gears, go somewhere else. That didn't work out, so he was back to the giallo. But it wasn't, if he was slinking back with his tail between his legs, it was quite a slink to make Profondo Rosso, we talked about how Adam was saying just what an impact Bird of the Crystal Plumage had, and we agreed that changed the course of the giallo. Many would argue, I would agree, that he perfected the giallo with Profondo Rosso, Deep Red.
Yeah. Now, there's a reason I skipped over Deep Red, actually. It's because I see that as an absolutely pivotal film in Dario's career. Many fans think it's his best movie, to even to this day. And they may well be right. But why I didn't sort of mention that in tandem with the Animal Trilogy is because I think you're seeing the first glimpses there of magic entering the world of Argento and the supernatural entering the world of Argento. It is at heart a giallo, and we'll go on to talk about it in detail as we go. But I think it links rather more with his later witchcraft movies. It's like a first sort of little toe in the water, stepping stone towards those. And then I think with Tenebrae in the early 80s, he sort of comes right back to the Animal Trilogy and the films that we've been talking about. So
it's hard to sort of put them in compartments, isn't it? I mean, this is what we try and do here. But I think even Four Flies on Grey Velvet, there's a sort of a magical strand running through that.
Yes, there is. Yes. Yeah. I mean,
which apparently he wasn't happy about when he was making that, wasn't it, Argento? He didn't like the sort of like the Native American get-out clause for the twist at the end of that movie. It was a sort of like a spiritual, supernatural-esque ending in with it. And I don't think it was on record as saying he didn't quite like that.
Four Flies?
Yeah.
Maybe that's why it was so hard to get hold of all these years.
Yeah, maybe.
Could be, because it was, I mean, everything's out there on Blu-ray now, but there was a time...
you had to go to the Scala and sit there through an all-nighter to see Four Flies on Grey Velvet.
Although we did play it at the Metro Cinema in Derby. There was like one ragged 16mm print somewhere in the country, and we did get hold of that in Derby. And as I remember, I think you attended on the night, John, didn't you?
Oh, actually, yeah, I did. Yeah, I gave an introduction to that one, but it's so long ago. I forgot. But
Four Flies on Grey Velvet was this film that was impossible to see for a while, and then when this 16mm print surfaced, you sort of saw it every opportunity you possibly could. Yeah. There is magic in that movie as well, and you're starting to get...
I think the Deep Red thing, it's not just the magic in the plot, I think it's the way that they're shot as well.
Very much.
Particularly the attention to detail and the set design for Deep Red has got a lot in common with like Suspiria and Inferno.
Yes, that was the sort of point I was trying to lead to. Yeah. So I think there are indications of fantasy in the plot of Deep Red, and things that just aren't explained even by the end of the movie. You know, the thing with the giallo and with the German form, the Creamy as well, is that you do normally, however convoluted it may be, you do normally get everything wrapped up at the end, and you get some ludicrous explanation of how it all happened and why there are 3 killers and all of this, you know. And Deep Red is one of the movies that sort of leaves a few little strands dangling, I think, and sort of sends the audience away knowing what happened at the end of the movie, but not necessarily being able to explain weird stuff like the premonitions at the start, or the odd mechanical doll that bursts into a room at one point. These are great moments, and this is Dario really sort of spreading his wings here and saying, look, you know, you can do anything you like with cinema, and you don't have to explain yourself.
Yeah, and a motto that he took to heart, I think, for the rest of his career.
Yeah, not always in a good way.
Not always in a good way. But moving on to Tenebrae, I think Tenebrae is one of those ones where giallo is often seen as a sort of like inspiration for the American slasher movie. And you have Tenebrae coming out early 80s after that boom of American slashers.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like he's trying to maybe cash in on that a little
Respond
bit.
to it in the way that Hitchcock did with Frenzy after the Euro boom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it feels like he's going back to that and making it as clean and as straightforward as a giallo can get. But for that, as if it's a slasher movie. The fact that it's not involving teenagers is probably the one thing that Italians don't do. That's one of the big differences between the giallo movies and the slasher movies. The people in the giallo movies are grown adults, whereas like the American slashers, they're all idiot teenagers. Whereas, you know, these are proper people with proper careers,
real people,
real people. And
your dad, you know,
exactly,
not your mates from university.
Exactly. But I think Tenebrae is fantastic. I think it holds up as that sort of. It's not obviously not on the level of Deep Red.
Yeah, but for what it is, as a sort of horror thriller, as a sort of slasher thriller, it's really, really superior.
Yeah, I mean, it has that wonderful shot where he goes over the house, the camera goes in through one window.
Crane.
Yeah, the ridiculous crane shot, which at the time was amazing.
Yeah.
Even now watching it, you think, God, that's incredible. And you would not see that in Friday the 13th Part 6.
Yeah, and critics, John probably foremost among them, have often said that the violence in Tenebrae... Well, one thing that's been said about the movie, and this may well be a sort of misquote from you, John, is that people reviewing that film talk about the sprays of blood, and which are excessive, absolutely excessive. Whenever a victim is claimed by the killer, there are like geysers of blood spraying everywhere. But people have said, it sprays up the sort of white walls of the apartments and the kitchens and so on, like a piece of modern art, and that's intentional. Dario's doing that on purpose.
It's also quite prescient because if you consider the way that Italian genre cinema was essentially ruined by the death blows were dealt by Silvio Berlusconi, who deregulated Italian TV, and in Tenebrae, Dario makes a point of chopping his wife's arm off. That's Mrs. Berlusconi getting it there.
Yeah. There's a symbolic scene if you want to look for one.
It's funny. I always talk about like why I love these movies, I always lead with that they're classy. And when people say classy, think, oh my God, but how can this be classy? You've got blood flying everywhere on the walls. It's like, but if you compare that to other films that are like, there is an art about it. There's a style about it.
Well, is Guernica by Picasso not art? Because
exactly,
Sure,
absolutely.
Sure.
And it's more in keeping with that kind of depiction of blood and violence than it is with Friday the 13th.
And I think Dario, in person, really does try to push this side of what he's all about and what his art is about.
Let's move on to his later Giallos then, shall we, and see whether the argument of poetry still holds up.
Well, I think in the case of Non Ho Sono, it does. This is a film that he made in 2001, and it's perhaps, for me, his last masterpiece. And he's one of those horror directors who's actually made 4 or 5 masterworks. There aren't many who've done this, and Argento has managed to sort of reinvent the horror film several times. Or, I'm not saying Non Ho Sono reinvented the horror film, but it sort of reinvented Dario's career. Or, at the very least, we were talking about him earlier before starting today, and we were saying that how we watched that film, and you thought, even if you didn't like the film all the way through, I think for the first 20-25 minutes, I think we were all thinking, Dario's not lost it. This is great.
It's still in there somewhere.
Yeah. The scene to focus on in Non Ho Sono is of course, the opening 15-20 minute victim being chased through a moving train, which is just up there with his very, very best sustained set pieces.
But that reminds me of the blurb for Suspiria, the only thing more frightening than the last 90 minutes of this film, or the first 15 or whatever. There's a sort of implicit anticlimax in there.
I know, it's almost saying, the start of this movie is great.
But it runs out of steam. I mean, Suspiria certainly doesn't, but I think you're keener on Non Ho Sono than I am.
Well, I think what carries Non Ho Sono for me is it does become a sort of Argento's greatest hits. But for me, at that point in his career, that was better than what we'd been getting for the previous 10 years. And for me, it's also a sign of when Argento works with major stars. I mentioned earlier how he sort of went for sort of second stringers, and you're getting people like Michael Brandon in his films in the early 70s,
Hey, come on, he was in Dempsey and Matrix.
Well, he's up there, I guess. Yeah, he's up there. But he's no Harvey Keitel, though, and he's certainly no Max von Sydow, and Max really carries Non Ho Sono for me. And I think whatever deficiencies that movie's got, the fact that Max pops up every few minutes and again, knocks it out of the park.
He's great. How necessary do you think his character's dementia was?
I'm sure Dario thinks so.
Yeah.
I can't answer that because I think Dario has got reasons for that to be there.
It might be another way of saying I saw something but I don't quite know, which runs through his film, figuring the clue out, you know.
Yes, yeah. That's an interesting point to make there, John, because this actually extends back to one of our favourite films here at Quad, Antonioni's Blow Up, you know, which Argento has sort of riffed on so many times. And here we are again, possibly with that happening here, you know. You programmed them on a bill together.
I did, yeah. Double build.
Yeah.
I need to get over to Derby more often. I need to get over here more often, I really do.
I think the difference between Blow Up and Profondo Rosso is Antonioni is making an art film where he doesn't care about the plot. Whereas Argento's making a crime film that's posing as an art film almost, in the way around.
That's plot-based, but because he's so stylish and so skilled, it turns into an art movie as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, the first time I saw Blow Up, at the point where the penny dropped for me that he wasn't going to solve the mystery, it felt like a slap in the face.
Yeah.
And I think Argento felt that as well. So he presents this fiendish mystery in Profondo Rosso and then resolves it with incredible flair and cleverness.
He leads the audience down the path of this is going to be like Blow Up. This is going to be an unsolvable crime, you know, and then, as you say, pulls this astonishing sort of explanation out at the end.
And the astonishing, you know, we were astonished towards the end of Blow Up, but to the kids of the VHS generation, Video Nasties and all the rest of it, when you got your Fletcher video VHS of Deep Red, and at the end he said, I did see the killer's face, and you think, no, you didn't. And you rewind, and you realise
you saw it
you
as well.
saw the face, and you did. You know, that is genius. That is as good as anything in thriller cinema. You know.
Yeah.
So we've kind of talked around it now. Let's dive deep into the reign of the opening of Suspiria. Let's move into the Three Mothers trilogy, because arguably these are the ones that are, well, the first two especially are the ones that people are going to talk about, are the ones that changed horror cinema.
So is this Argento's Godfather trilogy then? in reference to Mother of Tears? Belated.
Yeah, I think you're not wrong in the sort of like the drop off,
which gives us the first two, which are just indelible. You know, we're unapologetic in calling them classics. The question is, which one's your favourite, guys, Suspiria or Inferno?
I'm not going to say right now which is my favourite. I'm not even sure, but I am going to say that of anything I've ever written about films, the stuff that I keep getting the most flack for and people really hate it is when I say that Suspiria is a giallo. People just really kick up against that. They can't take it. People talk as though there's a strict demarcation between the gialli and Suspiria, and I don't see it. I think Suspiria, to me, is a giallo. Its most notable elements are those and where it veers into the horror film. But I think it's a film about an amateur detective trying to sort out a clue that she witnessed and she wasn't quite sure what it means, and she keeps ruminating about it. There are regular set-piece killings that are stylish, bravura stuff. There are POV shots. I mean, how to me is this not even a giallo-flavoured horror film,
Sure.
a horror-flavoured giallo? People talk about Short Night of the Glass Dolls. They say Perfume of the Lady in Black, it's a giallo. I mean, if those films are jolly, how is Suspiria not a giallo?
Yeah, and Adam touched on this earlier on when you were sort of saying that there are these elements of magic and fantasy sort of dotted through those previous films that we've talked about already. And I think it develops more and more and more, and then Deep Red is threatens to be taken over by it at times, but pulls itself back and does the whole Nick and Nora Charles sort of 1930s murder mystery sort of thing, which balances it out a little. But then Suspiria just seems to topple right over into fantasy. But it's almost the reverse there, John, of what we were talking about earlier. And I think this is what you're sort of pinpointing, is what you've got with Suspiria is a raging witchcraft fantasy, which is peppered with giallo cliches, rather than the hard giallo, which has these fantasy elements dotted in. You know, it's almost a switch around.
Yeah, Susie Banion's trying to find out who done it.
Yeah,
and the answer is a witch.
If it's a witch, this is where your fantasy comes in.
I'm saying there's a much more easier explanation why people say it's not a giallo, because they're snobs. That's ultimately what it is. The giallos are sleazy thrillers Whereas Suspiria is a beautiful work of art, a horror artwork.
Yeah.
And I think if you say, no, it's got its roots in giallo, no, it can't have its roots in giallo because beauty like that doesn't grow from rubbish like this. And I think that is very much woven through the narrative of Suspiria.
And I think the point all three of us are trying to emphasise in talking about those early films of Dario is that Argento is sort of off on his own path here. If you can almost watch those first 6 horror movies in a row, and you can see the development of how the fantasy is there from the start in something like Bird with the Crystal Plumage, certainly overtly by the time you reach Four Flies on Grey Velvet, and then it gradually takes over until you get to Inferno, and it's what the film's all about. You've got this completely brilliant, taut, but totally plotless.
That is pretty much removed from the giallo. I would concede that is not a giallo. Yeah.
Even though it has giallo-style deaths and murders in it. So, but you can't really term that as connected with giallo, because I think Dario's career path has sort of now tipped that right over on its head. And I think you can't really compare his work to his contemporaries in that sense and use these demarcation lines, because he's off on his own peculiar path, I think, from the start.
That's one of the things, when you watch that first 15 minutes of Suspiria, it's built like a dream. The whole film's built like a dream. You don't know whether what's actually happening is actually happening from minute one of the film, and that's not the same as a giallo. If you're looking at it from that point of view, the giallo ones are usually, as Dario's career has gone further and further, he's become less interested in the intricacies of plots, and it's almost like a distraction for him, and he just wants to put the visuals on the screen, and that obviously reaches its zenith in Inferno. But in Suspiria, it feels like it's the first one where he's just gone, okay, what can we do? We've done this, we've done that, we've done the other. We've built up success, we've built up the kudos, we've built up the money in the bank, ready to jump. Let's jump in with both feet. And he does that in that the whole film, but that first 15 minutes is a real statement of the music's coming in. You've got the pounding soundtrack, the rain beating down, the weird lights, the crazy sets, the beautiful interior design of the flats and things like that. It's just, it feels like you're walking through someone's living dream.
And we've actually got a character on screen who's representing us, and she doesn't know what's going on either. She's sort of thrown into this and hasn't got a clue. And as you say, John, has to become our detective and has to be our eyes and ears and work it all out.
I mean, Adam again mentioned the music. This goes back to the thing about Argento being a rock music journalist, and he's had great collaborations with Morricone, obviously not in the same class as the Leone-Morricone collaborations, because nothing is, but he's worked well with him, with the Goblins, Keith Emerson, because the Goblins are sort of the Italian ELP surrogates, and Pino Donaggio. The music's tremendously important for Argento.
Do we feel like the music, obviously, it plays such a big part, particularly in the 70s films, and when you get to the 90s, where maybe he's not as in touch with what his works on screen for general horror audiences, is that where the first signs of disconnect between his audience comes?
Well, he does this crazy thing in those movies. He just drops the needle on Iron Maiden and Motorhead.
Completely
inappropriate
you get like
moments.
a greatest hits album,
and some people really hate that. I quite like it. I think it's pleasantly bonkers.
Well, the music's good bit by bit, but I think people's problem with it is it's not what they're used to in an Argento film. They're used to either an incredible sort of orchestral score by a Morricone or someone, beautiful music counterpointing against the violence, or you've got this new invention which arrives with Deep Red and persists through the witchcraft movies of Goblin and Keith Emerson and progressive rock and synthesizers and loudness, not the music that horror movie audiences were used to at that time, and yet it changed the game. And suddenly you reach the mid-80s and it's these bizarre sort of almost like Keitel compilation albums, of heavy metal's greatest hits sort of
But
thing.
even when he brings back Simonetti for Mother of Tears and...
Was he on the card player?
Card player.
He did, yes.
Yeah.
I think he's on bits of Dracula, I think.
Right, okay, when he brings back Simonetti, it doesn't feel like... For a start, I think one of the things is like Argento's not in the same place as he was when he was making those first two Mothers films. So he's a different filmmaker, but equally Simonetti's a different musician as well by that point. So you're not going to get credit, and it just feels like it's not connecting.
But it's almost like it's a selling point to put those two names on the poster, and fans do respond to that. They see Argento and Goblin, or Argento and Simonetti on a poster together, and something clicks in our brains because it is us we're talking about, But I think there is this fan base out there that do respond to that, and then inevitably are disappointed when they see the results and it ain't what they saw in Suspiria 40 years ago.
So we're talking about disappointment, then let's move on to Mother of Tears.
Before we go on to that, sorry, because the second one was Inferno.
Oh, sure, yeah, of course, yeah.
I was asked before, which film do I like better? I mean, Suspiria. I ducked the question, but Suspiria. But Inferno is such a wonderful film.
My first experience of watching Inferno, I sat down, I was about 18 or something like that, and I went to the video shop when we had video shops, and I rented Inferno and Evil Dead 2, and I watched them both in an afternoon for the very first time. It was a glorious afternoon.
A great day.
Via the auspices of Derby Art Cinemas, I've been very lucky to see Inferno on the big screen 3 times, and I've introduced it once, which was its first screening here at Quad, and some 10, 11 years ago, I guess now.
We screened it here a few years ago as part of an all-nighter. Yeah. So it was like slap bang in the middle of an all-nighter, and it broke people. Yeah, it really did. They were tired. They were watching this film. It's like I say, there's no plot. It's an assault visually, musically. It broke people at 4 a.m.
Yeah. So, well, Keith Emerson certainly woke them up. But Inferno for me is the one, just because I wish Argento would make more films like it. I think it's the film he was always working towards. And I think if you're new to his films, do follow that line through, as we're saying, from Bird with the Crystal Plumage up to Inferno, and you'll sort of find it's a progression. I think it really is.
It's a creative, artistic arc that he's followed, his own singular. He's followed his demon, he's followed his muse, and yet he's had commercial success with it. So it's real auteur stuff.
Yeah, I think he's changed the game in a way that so few filmmakers do. In a way that maybe a Tim Burton did later on, in introducing audiences to the dark stuff, and saying, yeah, I'm going to make Batman, and I'm going to make Batman Returns, and I'm going to do Edward Scissorhands, and a mass audience is going to like it. I don't think even Dario quite got that mass audience that a filmmaker of Burton's type did, but it was a similar process. It was, I'm going to get my personal vision on screen, and it's going to be commercially successful.
It does remind me, Inferno reminds me of the progression of Francis Ford Coppola towards Apocalypse Now, where they both feel like they're the end points of a certain vision, a certain point. Obviously, both of them starting there with Vittorio Storaro as the cinematographer on Bird of Crystal Plumage, and then going to... But you just feel that it's like... That's sort of like, well, yes, there's a plot to Apocalypse Now. Yes, there's some sort of plot to Inferno, but it really doesn't matter. Yeah. It's the journey. It's the trip you're going on.
Sure. Now, you've reintroduced Coppola into the conversation, so let's go back to this Godfather 3 thing. And Argento's got his very own Godfather 3. So 27 years after Inferno, and after it was like people waiting for Doctor Who to come back on TV. Argento fans... Every 5 minutes, and in every fanzine and magazine you picked up, when's the third part of the Three Mothers trilogy coming out? And this went on and on and on and on. And there was even a movie called The Black Cat by Argento's great mate Luigi Cozzi. That was made in the late 80s, and that was supposed to be... Cozzi even had got so fed up with Argento not making a third part to the trilogy, he decided to have a go himself. But then... the clamour continued for when's Dario going to do the Mother of Tears movie? When are we going to see Mater Lacrimarum? Eventually, it all caved in. The film arrived, and it was Godfather 3, basically. But not that that's a bad thing in my book. But how about you guys?
I think he teased and teased and teased, and we may have one day we'll have the 3. Yeah. And then it reached a point where the career was floundering a bit. It's like, well, I can always pull out the conclusion of the Three Mothers trilogy, and it's kind of too little, too late, Dario. Yeah, kind of smacking of desperation.
For me, it felt... I watched it recently again, and it didn't feel like it was linked to the first two. I think that's the ultimate. It's got characters talking about Mater Lacrimarum, and you see. I mean, you build up like this character of the final mother, the Lacrimarum, as being beautiful and deadly, the most beautiful. And it's like, how do you cast the most beautiful woman in the world who's a demon? You just can't. You can't accurately cast that. It's almost impossible casting. And I think that's one of the things that really lets this down. I don't think the casting of that character, who was supposed to bring about the end of the world, blah blah blah, she hasn't got the screen presence.
Yeah. Now, had Dario made that film sort of 2 years later instead of doing Tenebrae, if he'd done it straight after Inferno, we'd had Anya Pironi in.
And there was also talk of Jennifer Connelly being the mother of tears at one point.
Yeah. So we'd seen a glimpse of what may or may not have been the mother of tears very briefly in Inferno, and then Jennifer Connelly, who sort of became Argento's muse in the mid-80s, sort of connected with the part as well. So either of those, I think, would have achieved what Adam's asking for.
Yeah, I mean, I kept watching and thinking, why isn't Monica Bellucci in this role, or someone like that?
And what we've got is, I don't know much about the lady who plays the part. I take it she's a sort of Italian model or something.
I think she's an Israeli actress and model, probably model and actress.
And she is very, very beautiful, but she's not what we've been led to expect by any means.
What tickled me was that they have these goth girls acting sort of outrageously around Rome. It's supposed to signal that the apocalypse is better. I mean, compared to the goings-on in my high street on an average Friday night, it was pretty tame stuff.
But I think that's one of the things as well. You have these characters, these goths, that all the witches of the world are descending on Rome, and they're all goths. They're all like teen goths. Yes. And you kind of feel like, well, I didn't get that from Suspiria. I didn't get that from Inferno, and suddenly I'm getting The Craft in the Fruza Balk 90s movie. I'm getting that style of thing, and it jarred for me. It didn't work.
But then this is where I think directors like Guadagnino have sort of stolen more from Mother of Tears than they did from Suspiria and Inferno, because that's got that sort of quality to it too, of having this sort of coven of young women that are sort of plotting to pull the rug out from under the world and take it over, I think they actually work in a way, but they work in a way that, as Adam has already suggested, I think you need to remove this film from the Suspiria and Inferno universe and judge it on its own merits. Judge it as an individual piece rather than the third part of a trilogy. And I think it's distanced enough that you're able to watch it as a standalone film. There are these references to characters from Suspiria and situations from Inferno and so on, but you don't need to know what those are to sort of be able to follow the plot of Mother of Tears. I think it plays very much as a sort of 21st century equivalent of the type of Italian movie that was coming along 10 years after Dario had hit big in the sort of mid-70s to the early 80s. The films that were coming out straight on VHS by directors like Umberto Lenzi, Luigi Cozzi and so on. And you were getting the first inklings here of people making films for Italian TV rather than aimed at cinemas. We were getting them on video over here on video rental. They all had sort of gothic trappings mixed in with the giallo-type violence. Again, they were all trying to copy what he'd done, but they were doing it on 1/10 of the budgets. It was going straight to VHS. And Mother of Tears sort of plays almost like a real upmarket version of that type of Italian movie from about 1987-88 for me. And on that score, I think it's a huge success. But as a sequel to Inferno, it don't cut the mustard. No way.
There's another female in that film, and a lot of people might suggest, I certainly would, that there was a time when Dario was thinking less about his own career development and more about finding good roles for his daughter. And some of them weren't even that good roles, No. And I think that's another criticism that could be levelled at that film. And
one thing I'd like to talk about in respect of the Argento family is because Dario had also worked with another daughter, Fiore, briefly, but Arzia became his sort of new muse for a time, and in fact right up to date. What do we think about the way that Dario has sort of depicted Arzia in movies? Because it all gets a little bit Donald Trumpish at times.
I find it awkward watching it because you know, well, that's his daughter, and there she is naked, writhing around in a shower or whatever. I find it odd, but that's only because I know he directed it.
Yeah,
I think if you look at it from a cold point of view, it's like, well, this film was shot in 1996 or whatever, and if I saw this and I didn't know the director was the father of the lead actress, it wouldn't seem odd that those scenes were in the movie. It's only because I know that her father directed it, it feels odd.
I think that people... he went off the boil with Phenomena, did he? I don't believe he did. But those films, up to and including opera, which I think is the classic run. The classic run is from bird to opera in my book. And but you'd have crazy things in those films. People say, the plot of Phenomena doesn't make any sense. What, do you think the plot of Inferno makes sense? Do you think the plot of Four Flies on Velvet makes sense? But he would do, in his crazy, operatic, full-blown, mind-blowing pomp, Argento would have crazy things in the films. Now, later on, when the canvas is reduced, the budget is reduced, he's got much less resources to make them, he puts silly things in the films, and they just annoy me. Like, is it... Nono Sono, where you've got a tap dancing dwarf coroner or something. Yeah. But the one that really drives me up the wall is there's the bit in Trauma where Brad Dourif is decapitated and his severed head is sitting there talking to people. Yeah. It's not physically possible because to talk, lungs have to pump air over the trachea and the larynx and all the rest of it, and then you speak. And he's sitting there yakking away, and he's a head. It's just so stupid. And I can't stand that in the later films, although I'll tolerate any amount of wackiness in the earlier films because they're so great.
He just seems to be a director that he needs to be, particularly the filmmaker he became after getting to Inferno and that style of filmmaking, that a drop of budget does it for him. He really suffers.
I think that really affected Argento on stuff like The Card Player and De Palma on recent things like Passion and Domino and so on. And the willingness to make epic cinema is still there in these guys. I think you get it with people like Bill Friedkin as well. But as we say, they're 80 now, and the budgets and the interest from young producers and financiers just isn't there anymore.
They'd rather make Scream 5, yeah.
We'll talk a bit more about Phenomena and some of the 80s stuff, but I before we leave the Witchcraft trilogy, I just want to talk about the position of the witch in movies and TV and art in general through the sort of mid-50s up to the late 70s. And the witch had almost stopped being a scary figure. You know, you saw it in Bewitched on TV or something. You know, it was the witches were either used for comedy or they appeared in fantasy films. And I think one of the crowning achievements of the trilogy, and certainly Suspiria, is that Argento made witches absolutely terrifying again.
Yeah. I would agree with that, but being slightly younger than you guys, I grew up watching The Witches by Nicholas Roeg, which they ain't friendly, nice witches. They're horrible, horrible witches that terrified me.
Yeah.
So I've never thought about witches being anything but scary.
To follow through my argument, then, I would say that Roeg's another person who was influenced by Argento. But yeah, I think he brought witches back to a peak of terror.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think obviously those horror characters, you know, your Frankenstein's vampires, your werewolves, all of those characters stopped being scary around the same period when they were moving into meeting Abbott and Costello. You know, it's like they became characters that were defanged, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
And I think witches were part of that, and it takes those filmmakers to reinvent those characters.
Sure. So let's do the late 80s then. We've got Dario doing Phenomena, opera. He's also moving into production. He's producing the first two Demons films, directed by his mate Lamberto Bava. He's producing for this young blade called Michele Soavi, who's come out of nowhere. So what about Dario, sort of 85 to 1990?
Well, I mean, if you even wind it a little further back, he produced Dawn of the Dead. The exact role he had in Dawn of the Dead, there's some dispute over that. But certainly he had a deal on it and he had his cut of it. And his cut of Dawn of the Dead will be the one that made such a big hit in Italy. And that will be why we got Zombie Flesh Eaters.
Leading to the zombie
and
craze.
Everything that came after that, which just crossed over now into... I mean, those of us who've been writing about this stuff for 30 years now find that... people are, just the world is zombie crazy, and we say, what about Lucio Fulci? Lucio who, you know?
Is there an argument that Dario Argento became like the Steven Spielberg of horror in the 80s? where he was attaching his name to the production side of things in the same way Steven Spielberg presents The Explorers.
I think he was a bit more hands-on than that.
I think that it was Argento's cut of Dawn of the Dead that was so successful in Italy, and then he got Zombie Due, the Fulci film. Argento took Fabrizio De Angelis, the producer of that, to court unsuccessfully. But then that whole zombie thing opened up, and there was all this gonzo horror, and the gonzo horror thing probably ends in 1985 with Demons, which is another film he produced for another director, Lamberto Bava. So, yeah, it was producer's hat on. He was a significant figure as well. And there is that question of how much did Lamberto direct, how much was Michele Soavi calling the shots on his own movies, But to be in there, and certainly on the posters, it is always Dario Argento's The Church, Dario Argento's The Sect.
Sure. And during this period, though, as we've already mentioned, Dario is continuing to work as a director as well in his own right. So you've already mentioned, John, the wackiness, as we've called it, of bits of phenomena and of opera. Now, these films are strange movies, possibly because of the soundtrack thing we mentioned earlier, where suddenly you've got all this crazy heavy metal on the soundtracks instead of the more fluid sort of prog rock scores that we
that was an
used
80s thing, where it's like, well, we're compiling a soundtrack, we're not doing a score.
Because the soundtrack had commercial value of its own.
I guess so,
There was stuff on the soundtrack albums that never went anywhere near the movie.
Exactly. You see Demons. Demons is literally Who's in Demons? I don't know, but it's got a Billy Idol song on it, because they're all over the poster.
Yeah, that's it.
I think there's a soundtrack album for Phenomena in Italy that has Frankie Goes to Hollywood on it.
How do we think phenomena and opera sort of sit within Dario's career then?
Well, you said, John, like you consider those two films as the end of the golden purple
period,
page,
yeah.
And I think I'd agree with that as well. I think opera, whilst not being as good as Profondo Rosso, as The Animals, again, to be fair, I think it's probably in the same ballpark as Four Flies and Cat o' Nine Tails.
The great set pieces are still there, and although they maybe don't quite hang together as complete movies, I think that's not what fans are necessarily interested in with Dario, certainly by this point. As long as you get 4 or 5 extended sequences that knock your socks off, they don't necessarily have to connect together. And I think Inferno allows that. The fact that Dario has made Inferno and it's been so free-form and so plotless has allowed him to then make films like Phenomena and Opera that don't necessarily sort of connect together or make linear sense, but that have these wow moments in them. And also have these bizarre moments. Like, I mean, the plot of Phenomena, if you wrote that down on the back of an envelope and showed it to someone, they'd never believe that there was a film that all this stuff happened in. You've got fly detectives.
Psychically connected to a schizophrenic schoolgirl.
Indeed. You've got a razor-wielding chimpanzee. The most bizarre aspect of the film for me is one that came into full bloom a couple of years after. Donald Pleasance plays a Scottish entomologist character and has a ball with the role. And 2 years later, a movie came out in Italy with Franco Nero reprising his role as Django from the late 60s. And it's a weird film anyway, because it's not quite a Western. It's not quite what you'd expect. I don't really know how to describe Django Strikes Again.
It's the only genuine Django sequel, which isn't really a Django film.
Yeah. It is a period piece, though, even though it's not quite a Western. So it's set decades before Phenomena. And there's Donald Pleasance playing his character from Phenomena.
So, Argento's juggling a lot during that movie, crazy plot visuals. Keeping Donald Pleasance sober during that film was probably a challenge as well. I think he was drinking quite a lot, hence the reprising the role in 2 movies' time or whatever.
I think when Phenomena came out, there was a certain sort of critical establishment in this country that didn't like it and said it was rubbish, and a lot of people were just playing follow the leader. And I always spoke up for this film. I think it's been very pleasing to me that in the succeeding decades, people have picked up on it and said, yeah, it is a great schlocky, insane horror movie. But I think there's more of a multiplicity of views,
Yeah, well, there were two big problems with it in this country. One is that it had half an hour slashed out of it and got released under the title Creepers to cinemas and mainly to video. The other I remember is the year it came out over here, 1986, was the year that Michael Parkinson stood in for Barry Norman on the Film 86 programme. And any movie that didn't have Gene Kelly in them, which was all of them, he hated, you know. And every review was, oh, why can't Robert Mitchum or Gene Kelly be in this film and improve it, you know. That I suppose, brings us on to opera. You're pitching this, John, as Argento's last glorious fling, really. What's so great about opera, then?
When I interviewed Argento, I suggested to him that the story of opera came prior to the story of phenomena. And he says, yes, you spotted it. They should be watched, you know, the videos should be watched, not in chronological order. It's just same part and parcel of the whole universe, the whole insanity.
Yeah.
You know?
Now, John, you mentioned Dawn of the Dead earlier on.
Yes.
I want to talk briefly, not too much about this, but just briefly mention one strand of Dario's career, which has run throughout his career, which is the American connection.
Yes, yeah.
It starts with his relationship with George Romero on Dawn of the Dead, and that being an Italian co-production, which sort of makes it part of that great Italian zombie lineage, you know, which isn't something that's always recognised by people. But every now and then he's jumped back into the States and sort of done stuff over there. We've mentioned Trauma already.
And George is back again. Romero's back in Two Evil Eyes.
Two Evil Eyes, which was their project originally, I gather. The idea was going to be a sort of 4-part film based on stories by Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, people talked about John Landis maybe doing one, Clive Barker doing one.
Yeah, I heard John Carpenter's name mentioned. Yeah, all the usual.
Four Evil Eyes doesn't work, though.
No, indeed. So unless you wear specs, you know. Dario's version of The Black Cat, and we've alluded to this already with Cozzi and others, I think every Italian exploitation director goes through this rite of passage where they make a James Bond rip-off, they make a science fiction outer space movie, they make
Maybe a Western.
They make a Western, they make a film about a terminally ill child, which were all the rage in the 70s. They maybe make a cannibal or zombie movie. And they
Don't
all
forget your post-apocalyptic.
The Mad Max rip-off.
Yeah.
And for some reason, a lot of them seem to make a version of The Black Cat.
Yes.
And here's Dario doing it after everybody else. But for me, I think this, rather than opera, is the great last gasp, up until Non Ho Sono, I think. But again, part of that is down to Dario just going crazy with his depiction of violence, which Dario, being interviewed by fanzines and magazines around this time, constantly referred to his battles with the British censor, which I suppose reached their peak with Creepers, as we've just mentioned. But he went on and on about this for years, even after the 2000 period, where censorship in this country was sort of starting to lessen a little, and we were starting to get more uncut films. Even then, Dario was still banging on about, the censors treated me terribly in the UK, you know. And I think Two Evil Eyes is a film where he really went for it with the violence. The other great thing about the movie for me is Harvey Keitel. I think he just gives a brilliant method performance as Rod Usher.
Rod Usher, fantastic.
The famous photographer, you know. And yeah, I love Two Evil Eyes. But then, as I say, we've got Trauma. Later on, we've got the 2 episodes that Dario did for the Masters of Horror TV series, where again, I think the idea of Mick Garris's TV show in 2005 was that we're going to hire the world's best horror directors and we're going to let them loose. And Dario, with the episodes Jennifer and Peltz, took that on board better than anybody, I think. I'm not saying he made the best episodes of that series, but I think you've got absolutely unfettered Argento.
I mean, is that
the
a case? I mean, look, so I watched those two, and I watched the Do You Like Hitchcock TV thing as well.
Yeah.
Do we think that maybe at this period of his career, mid-2000s onwards, he should have been actively looking to maybe move to TV, where maybe the budgets were a little bit higher than he could get to do a feature film, do 40 minutes of it?
I suppose this stems back. We really here now need to link this into what we were going to talk about earlier. And John, you seem to know more about this than we do. The way in which the Italian commercial film industry sort of evaporated around about 1990 and shifted over to TV. And if you can sort of take us through that and then lead on to the era that Adam's talking about here, around 2005, 2006.
Well, I think it started happening in the early... There was the video nasties and the cannibals and the zombies in the early 80s, and then they got onto the post-apocalyptic stuff, which was the final Filoni, really. When Argento did his own Hitchcock-like TV series in the early 70s...
Door into Darkness.
Yes, which established again the cult of Dario Argento.
The brand,
was a big part of that, yeah. It played on Rai Uno, and at the time there was only Rai Due, Rai 2, and that could only be seen by 50% of the Italian population. So essentially, when that was broadcast, if you went home, you were probably watching Dario Argento on TV. So we had the run of it there. But then later on, there's this multiplicity of Italian TV with game shows and stripping housewives and Tutti Frutti and all sorts of craziness. And Dario himself got into it. He had various attempts again to make a successful TV show of little pocket jolly episodes, and
there was
asked to guess the killer and all.
It was a true crime show called Giallo, strangely enough, which was so it was part sort of Police 5, but then 5 minutes of every show would be given over to Dario, and he'd make a little mini movie under the title, I've got it written down, Gli incubi di Dario Argento.
The nightmares of Dario Argento.
And so you can probably find these on YouTube somewhere.
Yes.
Little 3 or 4 minute mini Argento movies that hardly anyone's ever seen. So,
but as the TV thing took off and people were all staying in watching these beautiful Italian women taking their clothes off and stuff, they weren't going out to the cinema. People like Lenzi, all these old stages, Martino,
even Fulci.
Yes, they really kind of suffered, and the resources, nobody wanted to give people money to make films that nobody was going to watch. So those guys really suffered and tailed off. Argento was able to parlay for longer than that his reputation and his industry connections to make films. But as I think we've suggested, it was increasingly, I would say after 87, it was with diminishing returns setting in. And occasional, that's maybe still got it in him. That's promising. What's the next one going to be like? But no really sustained rise. No second wave in Argento's career. To my way of thinking.
But as Adam says, Dario was still dabbling in TV by the time the film Do You Like Hitchcock was made in 2005, because that was actually made as a TV production.
I love the business model of the video library, where they will only sell and hire films that were made by Alfred Hitchcock.
No wonder it goes out of business. Spoiler. But the whole plot actually hinges, or a big part of the plot hinges on this video store going out of business.
Try selling that to Dragon's Den. Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. And it all links back in with the fact that the script keeps homaging Hitchcock movies, and there's a suggestion that they never quite follow through. The movie might have been better if they had, that the events and the crimes and the murders are all being perpetrated because of the influence of Hitchcock's movies. They're being sort of copied from Hitchcock films. That never quite gets off the ground with that, but I think there's enough Hitchcock in there to sort of justify the title. But weird setup where you've got this video store and all of the customers are about 18, 19, 20 years old, and they all adore Strangers on a Train. And they're actually fighting over copies of it in the shop, It's a dream world. So we've got into the 21st century. Then we've mentioned already Non Ho Sono, Do You Like Hitchcock, the Three Mothers, but we need to talk, I think, about the rather extraordinary in its own way Giallo. Again, this was almost the perfect title for Argento. When it was announced in the press that Dario Argento's making a new movie and it's called Giallo, the waves of excitement amongst the fans. And again, this was never ever going to hold up and justify that wave of excitement, and as we know, it didn't. And in tandem with that, I think if we discuss that, and we can discuss what to date has been Dario's last feature, a 3D version of Dracula.
Well, I was at the world premiere of Jello in Edinburgh, and for my mind, as I watched it, I thought it was a comedy. I literally thought it was a comedy, and not just because it was funny, because it is funny, but it's called Jello. So my mind was like, well, what has Dario Argento left to say about the giallo genre?
Yeah,
nothing.
Yeah.
He perfected it in 1975 with Profondo Rosso. He's done a trilogy in there. He's done opera, he's done Tenebrae, he's done all these. He's got nothing left to say. So the only thing left to say is to poke fun at it and make it as a comedy. So I was convinced, I was absolutely convinced for months afterwards that this was a comedy. And it's only when the reviews started coming in after the visual thing that people were saying this is dreadful, it's almost unintentionally funny. I'm like, I'm still, part of me still convinced it was a comedy.
And it's a theory that I think holds water.
I think Adrian Brody thinks it's a comedy.
Yeah.
I think he's playing it for laughs in that movie.
How much can we talk about Brody's participation in this? The thing to mention first of all is that he sued the production and stopped the movie from getting widely shown because he never got paid for it, which is a sort of standard story in Italian exploitation. But we know plenty of other actors that have been there. But yeah, he actually put an injunction out on the film, stopped it coming out on DVD for a while because he'd not been paid. And I think a lot of people who worked in Italian films just gave up the ghost and said, "Oh, they're not paying me. Forget it." He, being Adrian Brody, being a name, he said they're not treating me like this. He went for
more
it.
than Caroline Munro, for instance.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting one though for Adrian Brody because it kind of feels like it's the start of his turn towards a Nicolas Cage style career, where you're never quite sure what you're going to get with Adrian Brody.
Not quite a decline, but
no, it's not a decline. It's a different path.
Coming more towards working his way towards us.
It's like. But just his film choices started to become erratic, I would say, in a Nicolas Cage kind of way. And
he wasn't going to win many more Oscars,
exactly. He wasn't. He felt like, I've won my Oscar, I'm moving on. Same as Nicolas Cage, I've won my Oscar, I'm going to do something different. And this felt like part of that tapestry of roles that he was doing. And I'm not sure. I think he's playing it for laughs. I think he's playing it as a comedy.
Yeah. Now, bearing in mind that we're probably talking to a lot of people who haven't seen Giallo, do we talk too much about Brody, or should we leave that open for people to discover?
I would say see it if you can. The comedy theory is an interesting one. Thank you for that. I got my own pet theory on Giallo. You sort of hear that Argento's making a film called Giallo. It's got to be some kind of definitive statement on the Giallo.
There's certain expectations there,
and maybe some sort of autobiographical statement. And then you notice that it was directed as a gun for hire thing, wasn't it? He didn't write it. Saying, it's not his statement then. It can't be his statement. It can't be autobiographical. But then when I watched it, and certainly if you read, and to me it's one of the more interesting things with cross currents going on in it. If you read Argento's autobiography published in the UK by Fab Press, and I would recommend that people do so. I enjoyed that book a lot more than I thought I would. He talks about being, not the most conventional looking chap and being an outsider and being made to suffer for it in his life. And then what's Giallo about? It's about an outsider, a mocked figure who's not conventionally good-looking.
Again, it's almost a fairy tale, a goblin type
Well,
story.
there's that as well. But
it's
about the pleasure that guy takes from dismembering beautiful people. And that makes me think, because you've been doing that throughout your career, Dario. So I think despite everything, I think it emerges as some kind of skewed, odd, autobiographical definitive statement.
As a third take, I think I've just mentioned it briefly already, sort of intruding on your assessment there, John, is that the central figure is almost he's a huge hulking character, but he's almost like a giant goblin. He's almost like sort of a troll-like figure.
Shrek.
So is this Dario's last great fairy tale as well? So is it a comedy? Is it an autobiography? Is it a fairy story?
It's probably none of those things, isn't it?
I guess so.
All of them and more.
to conclude, we've got to talk about Dracula 3D.
Yeah, I watched this yesterday and I need to get this off my chest. Because, oh, God, Dario. I mean, I put it to you, like now, it's like, has a filmmaker ever gone from the heights of Suspiria and Inferno to the depths of what Dracula 3D was? Because I thought it was utterly dreadful. And beyond Dario Argento just being a Dario Argento film, it's bad regardless of whether you're comparing it with Suspiria. If you compare it to a film that came out the same year, it's terrible. And I absolutely hate slagging off movies and running them down, but this movie is just really not worth your time.
Yeah,
I'm
going to defend it. I think
of course you are. It wouldn't be much of a podcast, would it?
No, see it in 3D if you can, because the compositions and certain shots in the movie and certain static tableau in the movie are brilliantly designed for 3D, and they probably don't work very well if you watch the film flat. That's a real high point for me, is the visuals in the movie. I think he's done it better in Dracula than he has done for years and years and years. Thomas Kretschmann plays Dracula, and interestingly played Van Helsing about 12 months later in a Sky TV series called Dracula, you may remember, with Jonathan Rhys-Meyers as the Count. So here we've got Rutger Hauer as Van Helsing and Kretschmann as Dracula. And I think they're both great. I think Kretschmann is a little bit of a bland Dracula, but I think he works that to the advantage of the character. He's very quietly spoken. I think you really do get the sense from him of both a sort of youthfulness and an eternal life. I think within his face and within his demeanour and within the whole way he holds himself and the way that he plays the role, he reaches this thing that all actors playing that part need to reach, which is a sense of vitality and a sense that he's always been here and always will be. And the third thing that I would say in favour of the film is the use of CGI, which I think we all loathe in modern cinema, is exceptionally well done. I think Dario and his technicians use it very well. I'm going to add a fourth thing to my three now. Dario Argento, we've talked about her already. She plays Lucy Westenra in this adaptation, which isn't particularly faithful to Stoker, we've got to say. John's giving a thumbs down here. I rather like Arzia in this. It's not a great performance, but I think what she does well is she plays Lucy as a living character and Lucy as a dying or dead character in very, very distinct ways. She makes an effort to make those into distinct characters, almost like a Jekyll and Hyde. And I think that's laudable. Whether she quite pulls it off or not is another matter. But I think the attempt is something that ought to be praised. So I'm sensing I'm on my own in praising the film. It's not all great, so the movie does have its flaws and its pitfalls, but I'm sticking a thumb up for Dracula in 3D.
Maybe I shouldn't say too much about it, because I think we should finish on a positive note, if that's indeed what we're coming to. You know, I watched the movie. Yeah, okay, I'm not going to watch it again.
I hate it. I don't have any sort of like qualms about ending the podcast on a bad note, so it's pretty terrible. Yeah. And I think all the points that you make, Daryl, I would absolutely disagree with probably all of them. I think
not for the first time.
Well, no, I thought the CGI was dreadful. It was like it was annoying, and it was like constantly there. It was blatantly shot on sort of like green screen sets and cheap sort of like green screen sets. I know the film's set in like Transylvania, but it feels like it was shot in Budapest. You know, it feels like it was like one of those movies where the first two were shot in Italy and Rome, and it's always beautiful vistas, and then suddenly he's making it in Bulgaria on a third of the budget with a cast of nobodies. I'm really disappointed with it. I was really disappointed with it, and I'm never going to watch it again.
Okay,
I had to watch Profondo Rosso just to wash it out of my brain. Yeah.
I think to end on a positive note then, or certainly for our listeners, is I suspect we've probably got a lot of newcomers to Argento who might be listening. You know, what's not necessarily your personal favourite Argento film, but which film would you recommend to watch as an Argento starting point. I would say personally, go right from the start and go with Bird with the Crystal Plumage and work your way through. Over to you guys.
Well, I think one of the plus points of things, if you are looking to get into Dario Argento's work and you start off with the best films, it's going to take you years before you get to Dracula. So you're all right, because the man's made we've talked about maybe four masterpieces in his career, and there's at least 4 or 5 ones that are near masterpieces. So there's a lot in this man's career that you are going to thoroughly enjoy and be astounded by. And films that change the genre and certainly change the industry, the horror industry, definitely. For me, it's Profondo Rosso. It kind of brings together those 3, the giallo movies that he started his career with, hones that, but also has that one foot in the more fantastical, supernatural area that he would go into with Suspiria. I think going straight in with Suspiria might be a bit much, but I think Profondo Rosso is just such a man, and benefits from repeat viewings as well.
So let's do the gracious thing and give the last word to
absolutely.
Our special guest, Mr. Martin.
Both of the sort of routes you outlined have their merits, and both of them result in you watching Dracula in 3D last. You might want to watch Suspiria and just know that this is a serious filmmaker that has to be reckoned with. I think there's something to be said for, if you take our word for it that he's a serious filmmaker with a serious body of work, go back to the beginning and take it from there. So I would tend to go with Dario on that one.
So Dario Argento.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, John, for joining us for this wonderful episode of discussing Dario's work.
You.
It's been a real pleasure to be here with you guys. I'd love to do it again. If you don't hear me again on this podcast, you'll know it's not because I didn't want to be on it. It's because these two said, we're not having that jerk on again.
We've trapped him in our basement doing giallo-like things to him.
Yeah, we'll bring him out every time we talk in Italian horror, so that's no problem. Cool, yes, thank you very much for listening. Once again, I want to thank Quad and the BFI for helping support these podcasts. There will be more information on further reading, because we've mentioned a lot of films today. There will be more further reading on our website, so please check out the supporting materials, and we will see you again in a few weeks' time. Take care.
Sweet dreams.